All right, I'm going to share my screen. Everyone, today we are going to be talking about the new updates to the new forms. I always have to get this out of the way. All right. And then, okay. So twice a year in June and in December, California Association of Realtors, updates forms. They don't update all of them. They update certain ones that need updating a few times. If there's something that's an immediate need, they'll update it in the middle of the year, but they try to do it just twice a year. They try to not mess with the major forms more than once in every 4 years. Obviously, the purchase agreement has been updated a lot lately since all of our changes, and it's one of the ones that's been updated again. So we're going to talk about that today as well. I think there's something like 43 updates this time. A lot of them don't pertain to us. A lot of them are for properties, which we don't really handle much in this office. And then there's some just like word changes or typo stuff that they've fixed. But there are several new forms that I'll talk about today as well. Okay. Go. Okay, let's try this again. Escape. Oh, it's doing it again. Oh my gosh. Okay, let me close out of here and start over. Okay. Present. Present full screen. Present. No. Okay, well, you're gonna, I guess, see my not full screen. Try to do it.
Just use the preview. That's
Do it like this?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, sorry guys, this is not ideal. Anyway, we'll move on. First update is to the RPA, Section 3G3, the one we've been talking about for over a year now. The section of, this is where you write in your compensation that you would like the seller to pay.
just keep going up. I'm just gonna improve on it.
Okay. Okay, so Section 3G3, we know, remember we used to have that SPBB form, you had to fill that out, and then they put the box in now that you can just write in the amount. That is staying. They have taken away the second part of 3G3, where it was an affirmation confirmation from the buyer stating that yes, they have a buyer representation agreement and it reflects this property and this amount of money. They have taken that out. So now it's just seller agrees to pay out of the transaction proceeds, and then you fill in your percentage or the final purchase price of the final purchase price and or the flat fee. That's the same. They've taken out the words toward the obligation of buyer to compensate buyer's broker. They've just simply simplified it to say the seller will pay this amount of the proceeds, seller payment to compensate buyer's broker. It doesn't say buyer obligation any longer. And again, they took out that buyer affirmatively represents. Why did they do this? Okay, there have been lots of confusion. Number one, they decided it is not the seller's and the listing agent's responsibility to police the contract between the buyer broker and the buyer. They wanted that to not be something that a liability is placed on the listing broker or even the seller. So they're removing that reason for giving the BRBC to the listing side. They already said we don't need to do that. Some people were still asking for it. They wanted to prove that it was correct and filled out right. And ultimately what it boiled down to is it was getting in the way of the point of real estate. The point of real estate is to buy and sell homes for the clients, to close the transactions, to have all parties agree and be happy. And when we're suddenly in this fight over, did you complete your form correctly? No, you didn't. Now I don't owe you money. Guess what? The deal falls apart. So back in their committees, they went back and forth throughout this whole year and decided we're removing that liability from the listing side. It falls back to the broker side of the buyer, and it's their compliance and their issue to make sure that that form is filled out correctly. Okay, any questions on why they removed that section? I think they removed the verbiage about the affirming that they have that agreement just because it was so confusing and some listing agents still were asking for the buyer representation agreement to be in their file. So they got rid of it fully. I happen to agree with this. I think some people were getting in the weeds of if it's filled it out correctly. And when you think about it, on the buyer side, we don't ask the listing side to show that they have a listing agreement. So they are separating the two. Okay, next up, they did some changes to the BRBC and to the BCA, which is the buyer compensation advisory. And it's basically pointing out to the buyer that they cannot ask for more in their offer than their representation agreement states. That was one of the NAR rules. And for the most part, it's followed okay, but I've actually seen come through compliance where a BRBC will have a lesser amount than what the agent has asked for in the offer, and that is obviously cannot happen. So they are making it explicit in two different spots to the buyer now that you can't, whatever is on this BRBC, you cannot ask for more to be paid to your agent in the offer. And then a question was asked, what happens if you're in contract and your compliance finds out and sees that your BRBC says 2% and you have asked for 3% and the 3% has been agreed to? What do you do? And the answer was you go back, you do an amendment to the purchase agreement and you only get 2%. Okay, you cannot modify your BRBC after the fact. It has to be done prior to asking in the offer. Okay, and that's how it's always been. But now that we're into this for a year, these issues are popping up. And it's a huge deal if it closes and you have been paid more and something comes and finds out there's fines from the MLS, there's fines from the DRE. Fines. If you do not have your BRBC completed prior to submitting that offer, or at the very least at the same time as submitting your offer, you technically can be fined up to $20,000. Okay, so it is serious. Right, so they're reminding the people.
They need to make it serious.
Yeah. Yeah, and I have seen a lot who are forgetting to do that before they're showing. Okay, so remember, you need to have an agreement. It doesn't have to be other BRBC, it can be that PSRA one, which is the smaller version, but you need to have permission to show the house. That's what I call it. Any questions on that? Nope. Okay, moving on. Why isn't it showing up?
You know what, I think I have an idea why it's doing what it's doing. You have a lot of windows open and I think it's
Like me.
I know what every window is.
I think it's just timing out the amount of memory you have. So
Okay.
if you just close some windows up on
Alright.
that's my,
Okay.
sorry.
I know what they all are. Okay. You guys get to see.
All your windows.
Yeah.
God, it was all real estate.
Oops, and then I closed out,
Yeah, I think you closed up.
Canva.
And you've already closed out a bunch and there's still a bunch of windows open.
Oh, here we go. Okay.
We're gonna have to
Sort
have
of.
a secret
You
document.
both in your clothes.
Mhm. Okay, there we go. Okay. Next one. This is a new form.
Why don't you go ahead and do it? Because it's-
See if it works.
I think it
Okay.
works.
Okay. Oh, yay.
Hey, well, problem solved. Problem solved.
Thanks, Mitz.
Uh-huh.
But I like my windows open. Okay. AEA to the disclosures. This is a brand new form. It's a great idea. I'm glad they came up with this. So let's say you have already done your TDS and your SPQ, you've already given them to the buyer side, and something comes up, whether something new comes up in the house, or maybe your seller forgot something and then they have remembered. You need to do an amendment to the disclosures. Before, we only had an addendum that we could check the box TDS or SPQ and you would write it there. However, they have created their own form, an amendment to prior disclosures. So you'll see that it literally states this was previously provided. You're going to check SPQ, TDS, whatever form it belongs to, and then you're going to write the information in that you're amending. And then it warns you down here, again, like I talked about in my class a couple weeks ago, that any new information you have given to be disclosed could possibly open up a new window for the buyer to cancel depending on what has been disclosed. Okay, any questions on that one? Okay, next up, advisories. Okay, seller in possession. This is pretty common. It was common, really common in the past. I still see it some today, although not as much. The seller needs a little bit of time in the house after closing. So we do the seller in possession form. And in that form, you can negotiate the terms of how long they're going to be in there. The SIP can only be used for 29 days or less because 30 days creates tenancy and 29 does not. So within that, you can, figure out if it's going to be for free, if there's going to be a deposit, if they're going to pay daily, whatever the terms are. But they have created a seller in possession advisory, and it is just advising the seller of what this actually means for them or the buyer. I mean, because the buyer is now taking on a lot of liability. It could affect their insurance, it could affect their lending. And so this is pointing out things for them to think about and counseling them to go ahead and talk to a qualified tax person and a qualified attorney, helping us not have so much liability over that. Okay. The next one is rental property owner advisory. Okay, this will go along with, let's say it's over 30 days that the seller is going to be in possession. You now have to do a residential listing, residential lease after the sale, the RLAS, has way more terms and information, and tenancy is created at that point. So this form would go along with that, and it would go also if you have an investor client who is buying the property to rent it out, you now need to give them this rental property owner advisory. And it has information that helping them think through everything that they're getting themselves into by becoming a landlord. That's not even the term we have to use anymore. I forget what it is.
Housing provider.
Housing provider, yes. Okay. So that form is there. It's not required, but it's going to be recommended that we give advisories if we have clients that are becoming investors. Okay, this is a fun one. Additional signature, the ASA. We sometimes have buyers that have more than two buyers. I have always recommended that you just shove the additional signatures onto the same thing, because the old additional signature form had to be signed one for each individual document. Sometimes you could write comma, this doc, this doc, this doc. It got cumbersome, it's hard to follow, there's a hard chain of events here. But now they have changed it to include this big grid right here that says all forms related to, let's say, checkbox purchase, and then it literally lists everything within that purchase agreement contract. Okay, so, and then you could do one for the listing, buyer representation, rental, whatever, and then there's also an others. So if you're later on in the contract and this is additional signing for an amendment or something, you would write that in the other box. So it makes it a little bit easier. And then there's room for 4 additional signatures on this one. So technically you could have 6 buyers signing. And it points out that, for example, if X, Y, and Z are all buyers and X and Y previously signed the documents, only Z needs to sign below. Apparently people were getting confused, having all the buyers sign this form. So it's just the ones that don't fit on the original purchase agreement. Okay? If it's only 3, maybe 4, I'm still gonna be fine with you putting them all on the original documents, okay? Okay, that is pretty much it that for the ones that really pertain to us. These new forms are coming out next week. I've heard the 23rd, I've heard the 24th, I've heard the 26th. So I'm just gonna say sometime next week, they'll be live in your zip forms or Glide or whatever you use. You can find them now on car.org in the new forms section, and that they still have sample written over the top of them if you want to check them out. Okay, anybody have any questions for me?
On the 30 days, when does that start? Like the 29 days that they need to stay in? Where does they have the dates for the starting and stopping?
So yeah, so on the SIP is asking for when the dates start and stop, the 29 days. It's depending on what you put in that contract, but the standard is 29 days after the close of escrow. So close of escrow will be day 0, or you can actually put a solid date on that form.
It's a straight number, isn't it?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, so if the 29th day is Saturday, they gotta be out on Saturday. It isn't pushed to Monday. Francie.
That situation that I just explained to you about the 180-day escrow.
Mhm.
Originally, we were talking about doing the private or separate, aside from outside of the contract, rental agreement between the new buyer who's gonna rent during escrow.
Okay, that's a totally different,
It's totally different situation.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
and there is
would be-
now, there will be an advisory that we're advising that they don't do that.
Okay,
But we need to give that to them so that we can release our liability on that.
okay.
Mhm. Any other questions? Let me see if there's anything on the Zoom. I don't know where to find it.
Miss me.
All right, I know why. That's my fault. My bad. There it is.
Yeah.
There's one in the chat. Thank you, Jessica.
Okay.
Oh, you rock. All right. What was
Thank
that?
you, Amy.
Oh, that's the person that left
Yeah.
the email for you this morning. Oh, nice.
Okay, guys, well, that's it for me then. That's a little just synopsis of what's coming out, and obviously if you have questions, you can reach out to me anytime and we'll figure it out. Okay.
Amy Rivas, anyway.
She's from Porterville.
I know she's from Porterville. She
Yeah.
left you a nice comment this morning.